In this clip, we'll take a look at how we can access the shader for this hair, as well as how we can work with some of these other modifiers. So to access the hair is very easy. I'm going to go ahead and select the hairstyle 01 over here. And if I go and make sure I'm in the attribute editor here, if I just kind of tab over, you'll see the hair physical shader here. And this is the same hair shader we've already seen several times. This is not an Arnold shader, but it is fully compatible with Arnold. So you can see I can go ahead and adjust it pretty easily there, work with any of the settings I need, including all of my different highlight settings. So you can see all very easy to do, so not any different than the other hair systems we've taken a look at. Now, before I go ahead and start working with some of the modifiers, I do want to actually increase the density of this hair a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this down a little bit here. There we go. Select the hairstyle base, and I'll go ahead and increase my density multiplier to 10. So there's a lot more hairs in there, maybe even to 15. There we go. So lots and lots of hairs. And for the overall shape of the hairs, I think we're fine. Maybe they're a little bit too thick, but for the most part, that'll be okay. So right now we do actually have two modifiers in here. The scale is technically a modifier. Remember, it could change the scale of the hair depending on the scale of our scene. If we have a much larger character, or whether if we scaled our character up, we could go ahead and increase the scale of the hair here. We also have the sculpt modifier, which allows us to actually have these sculpt layers. You can see that it has an overall mask that I can turn off, and I could even paint so that the sculpt layers only affect in certain areas. And then other than that, it gives us a slider in here for each one of the different sculpt layers that we've created within that sculpt modifier. Now, there are other types of modifiers we can add. If I click over here, you can see there are a few. Now, curve to spline, we're going to take a look at in just a moment. We're going to come back to it. Displacement is one we can take a look at, but we really don't need. What displacement would do is you can load a displacement map into here. Let's say you'd sculpted this head up in ZBrush and there were big lumps and bumps on the head. You could load those maps into here, and that way it would actually add the hairs in that displaced pattern to match the look of the mesh when it would render being displaced. Go ahead and delete that. Guide and linear wire will take a look when we look at animating the hair. So we're going to skip by that for a moment. And let's take a look at noise over here. So when I go ahead and add in noise, whoops, let me go ahead and make sure I have a description selected. There we go, noise. You can see it'll add noise to all of the hair. So if I go here into my attribute editor, select noise, you can see I can work with my frequency, the magnitude, as well as the correlation, or how much it's going to match surrounding hairs. And you can see I'm starting to lose resolution already though, but we know how to fix that. We can select the hairstyle base, drop down here, and maybe increase our points to 15 and rebuild, and those will become a lot smoother. But you can see that we can add this modifier to affect all of the hair. Unfortunately, this is the only kind of modifier of its type. We don't really have the clumping modifiers, the cut modifiers, and all those other great modifiers we have in other parts of XGen, but hopefully they'll add them in the future. But this is the one we have for right now. You can see I can still adjust it there, and I can have this secondary layer of noise completely created by this modifier, as opposed to having to go in and do it through sculpting the way we did earlier. Go ahead and close that off there, and you can always shut that off to kind of see the difference there. I think I will probably go ahead and keep this just a little bit lower right there. Okay, so we do again have other modifiers here as well. We have the sculpt modifier, which is what we're dealing with here, so you can create a second one if you want to. And then we also have the spline cache. We'll look at this again after we've taken a look at animating the hair. So that just leaves us with curve to spline over here. So curve to spline is going to actually replace all of the hairs here with hairs created from curves that we already have imported. So let me go ahead and pause the video for a moment. I'm going to import the same curves we worked with earlier in the previous module, and we'll see how we can replace these hairs with those curves. Okay, here we are. I've imported the curves. Now I've imported a lot more curves than we had before. Before we were actually just adding the curves in, and then they would add extra curves, or excuse me, extra hairs around it. So when we use this system, every curve becomes a single hair. So I've again imported a lot more of them. There's about 10,000 of them here. So if I were to disable this, you can kind of see what we have there. So let's see how I can convert these now to be part of this system. To do that, I'm going to come over here and add a curve to spline modifier. Go ahead and select that, and you can see the other hair disappears. You can see everything else has been disabled as well. So what I need to do here now is import all of those curves here. So to do this, you basically select your curves and you hit import. But notice obviously when I select them, this goes away. So a way we can adjust this, or rather fix this, is if I select curves to spline and hit copy tab, it'll kind of just duplicate this tab for me here. I can then come over here to my outliner, grab all of my curves, which is a lot, and this will take a few moments, so I'm definitely going to pause while I do this, but I'm basically now just going to hit add selected curves, and I'll pause as soon as we're done. Alright, so that took about 10 minutes. It was a little bit slow, but not bad considering we converted about 10,000 curves. So I can go ahead and close this off here, and I can also here in my outliner just go ahead and get rid of these curves now. Go ahead and close that off there. Select that, and I'll just hide the hairs. Don't delete the hairs. Okay, so you can see we now have these hairs in here. Now, unfortunately, they don't have any of the same settings to adjust that we had on the hairstyle base. So you can't actually go in here and change the density on them. So you kind of have to just deal with what you have here. However, you can still go to the overall hairstyle over here. Go ahead and select that shape there, and we could still work with things such as the width, the taper, all of that still affects. And let's say you do want something like this noise modifier. You could say I can drag that over, and now the noise modifier will affect those. Now, the sculpt modifier is not going to necessarily affect everything. You can see right now, turning that on and off does nothing. We do have to create a new sculpt modifier to work with this here. I'll just drag that kind of out of the way there. We'll go ahead and add a new sculpt layer in here. Oops, let me actually select. Oops, let's actually go ahead and add the sculpt modifier first. There we go. And that'll have the sculpt layer in there. Now, not every sculpting tool will work on these curves, unfortunately. However, some will. If I go ahead and bring up my tools over here, bring them over, you'll notice things like the density don't work, unfortunately. However, things such as the comb brush will work, and you can see I can still go in and comb these curves just as if they were created with this system to begin with. So that's a quick look at working with some of the modifiers here inside of our interactive grooming splines.